When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Comedy YouTube channel. Today's video, we have finally made it to the last chapter of A Game of Thrones, Dany 10. One of the best chapters of the entire series and this book specifically. And yeah, kind of a somber but, exciting note that we finally have gotten through the first book. So thank you for everybody that's made it up to this point. But let's not waste any time. Let's get into Dany 10, A Game of Thrones. So Dany notes how the land was red and good wood was hard to come by, but mostly they got branches or little bits of straw and bushes for the middle. Her foragers had found 2 straight trees they used for the funeral pyre. Not only is Daenerys in a really bad spot as she's kind of entering into the Red Waste and kind of that arc that we're going to see in the next book in the Clash of Kings, even basic resources just as like wood, for instance, is not easy to come by in terms of where they are right now. And so even just trying to do a funeral is something that's very difficult to do. And also Dany wants it to be a grand funeral. She doesn't want it to be some little thing. It's got to be able to burn not only Drogo, but all of his possessions, also Mirri Maz, and then also her eggs. So got to be a big funeral pyre for a big moment of the series. But as well, Ricardo had taken one of their horses to the pyre, gave it an apple, and killed the animal. Part of this is for the blood ritual that she's basically trying to do, but part of it is also because a horse needs to die so that Drogo will have a mount in the afterlife. But at this, Mirri begins to pipe up, noting it'll take more than a horse for a blood ritual of which she does not know the words. Whatever she is planning, it will not work. And she tries to gain her freedom, saying that she can help. But Dany is past that time and orders her quieted, where she is whipped and remains silent. So this tells us 2 things, right? The first thing is that Dany is kind of growing, right? She's not going to trust this person that's already betrayed her to this point. But also that Mirri Maz does care about her life to some degree because she's trying to wiggle out of being a prisoner. So that big show that we get in like the last chapter, for instance, where she's like, oh, life doesn't really matter anymore because everything else is gone. There still is that fear that I think pretty much almost all humans have, where it's like, what comes after death, right? Is it nothing? Is it some sort of afterlife? What is it? And I think Mirri, kind of realizing she may die soon, is also trying to kind of worm her way into getting out of it. But that gets us into page 799. They built the platform over the horse's body, putting all of Drogo's treasures, his weapons, clothing, all that he really held dear in life that they still had in this pyre. Another layer of brush was put over the treasures. But at this, Jorah pulls her aside and starts to begin saying princess, but is cut off as Dany asks why he calls her that when Viserys was his king. Dany has almost a complete shift in her dynamic and her character, where the last couple chapters, and really this whole story, she's been kind of a naive girl, trying to find her confidence and her place in the world. And it took a lot of atrocities kind of happening, her husband dying, her child dying, for her to become a bit stronger, realizing her position, and that's what she's imposing on Jorah here. He notes that Viserys was, but Dany kicks in again. He is dead now. She was his heir. Whatever he was his now, or was hers now. As Jorah calls her his queen and gives his sword and heart to her, something Viserys never had. He tries to convince her not to do what she plans. Leave Drogo behind. No one will take you to Vaes Dothrak, and to come east with him to Yeti or Ashai to look on the wonders of the world. And continues stating that she cannot do this. And to an extent, Jorah knows what she's planning. I think Jorah believes that she's trying to basically commit suicide, more or less, not exactly what Dany has planned. Because Dany has it to where she thinks that this is basically going to be a sacrifice of like her husband's body, her son's body, Mirri, the horse. All of this is going to equivalate into getting the dragons to come back to life. That's basically what the dream told her. It's what she's been feeling inside of the egg, that there is life within them, that they just need to be awakened. All of that is kind of prompting Daenerys to actually do this kind of ritual where she feels like she's going to be fine. From people that don't know that, because Daenerys has not explained any of that to anyone, it just seems like, Daenerys is going to burn herself with her husband It's not a great look, and Jorah is kind of pointing that out. And Jorah is also logical to think, okay, given the situation, it would make sense to take the eggs, take everything, and go to Ashai or to YT or whatever. Then from there, maybe to seek passage to go maybe back to the Free Cities or whatnot. But Dany says she must, and he does not understand. Jorah says he knows she loved him, but he loved his wife as well. But he did not die with her. He continues saying, "You are my queen, my sword is yours, but do not ask me to stand aside and watch you burn." Again, I think this is logical from Jorah. Think about every single time that you've seen in the story a Targaryen try to bring the dragons back and how that's gone for them since after the dance. Doesn't go well for them, and it's usually led to pretty horrific atrocities, notably Summerhall. So, again, Jorah has a point. And also, if you want to think about something else, right? Summerhall wasn't that long ago. Like, that was a little bit before Robert's Rebellion. It wasn't that far away. It's why I kind of started my Robert's Rebellion series with Summerhall. It's not that far away. So when you have that in the back of your mind, the recent history of what happened with Aegon V and his family kind of puts that into perspective. But Dany asks if that is what he fears as she kisses him on the forehead. She is not such a child anymore. And again, she kind of just, if we the audience did not understand where she's coming from with the foreshadowing of the last chapter, heavily foreshadowing what she's going to do here, you would think Daenerys is going mad. And a lot of people are going to call her out on that she's going mad. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's insane. It's interesting the way Daenerys responds to those things, because if George was going to do something where he makes Daenerys go mad, this chapter of all of the chapters of Daenerys in the series so far is the closest we have to Daenerys in a state of almost madness, where it just seems sheerly insane of her actions, and how she goes about justifying it is quite interesting. Jorah asks then, she does not mean to die with him, and Dany swears that she does not. They begin building the third level where the bodies were laid north to south, from ice to fire, and the sun was setting in the west. She called their attention, seeing no more than 100, and wonders how many Aegon had at the beginning. Again, the parallels are very strong here between Daenerys and Aegon, specifically because by the end of this chapter, Daenerys will have 3 dragons like Aegon had with his sister wives. And I will say Aegon had more people than Daenerys does, and it was a very different situation, but the parallels are there. And at this, she begins to speak to the Khalasar. She notes that they will be her Khalasar. She looks at them, some of them are slaves, and she frees them, allowing them to go unmolested. But if they stay, it will be as brothers and sisters and husbands and wives. She asks for their hearts and hands, and there will always be a place for you. She notes she was a child yesterday, now she is a woman, and tomorrow maybe she will be old. She then proclaims Drogo her co to protect her from harm as she gives him her silver whip that was her bride's gift. But Drogo is unsure by this, saying he cannot be a bloodrider to a woman. And again, think about how insane this must feel if you are in this Khalasar or this little group of Dothraki. 1, their culture does not permit for women to be the leader. So already she seems kind of insane, and kind of by her talk, she also kind of seems to just be out of her mind, right? Like if I was a Dothraki in this moment, I'd be thinking this woman has gone insane. She has been driven insane by grief, by losing her child and Drogo, losing all of her power, being completely desperate, turning to blood magic, like, you know, what happens with Drogo and her child and all that stuff. I would think that she's gone off the deep end. And that's not exactly the case, but Daenerys still comes off kind of wild in this chapter. She ignores this, going to Ago, thinking if she looks back, she is lost. She names him to be her bloodrider, to protect her from harm, giving him a dragon bone bow. But once again, he cannot say the words, as a woman cannot lead the Khalasar or declare a co. Again, Daenerys is being very progressive in terms of the Dothraki culture. This is really not allowed. Lastly, she names Ricardo and names him a co, giving him the Uraka that had gold on the hilt that had been gifted to her, as she asks him to ride at her side and protect her. Ricardo, just like the others, says that he can only ride with her to Vaes Dothrak for her to join the Crones. But again, if you're these people, I really want to hammer the nail in, because I want to try and get the perspective of not just Daenerys, but all these other people. She is looking insane. She just, she's going about their culture completely different. Nobody's going to be able to back her. She isn't viewed as being this strong leader yet. And so this just comes off as quite weird. And so that gets us into page 801. Dany nodded, almost not hearing him, as she turned to her last champion, Jorah, who she asked for his oath, though she has nothing she can give him but promises him a Valyrian steel sword. Jorah kneels, confirming the oath, and says he vows to serve and protect her through whatever may come. What I'm interested by this is, how does Dany plan to give him a Valyrian steel sword? Because it's not the Targaryen swords it would appear that she's planning to give him. Those she does not possess, and those are kind of like, we don't know really where they are. It would appear one's in Bloodraven's cave, and the other one possibly could be with Illyrio or somebody within the Free Cities. Dany is not going to have access to either. So I'm very curious as to what Valyrian steel sword she was trying to give Jorah, but who knows. Dany says she will hold him to that oath and prays he never regrets the giving of it, as she lightly kisses him on the lips, as she knows the entire Khalasar's eyes are on her. She names him the first of her Queen's Guard and goes into the tent. A lot going on with Dany making him part of the Kingsguard. It's ironic, given that he betrayed her already and is yet to say anything. This is being Daenerys' most trusted person at the time. We see her kissing Jorah, which maybe is kind of the reason that also she and him have this weird relationship for the next like $2, where Jorah kind of comes on to her sometimes, and it's just very awkward. But yeah. But she knew they were muttering and staring, and probably thought she was mad, and maybe she was. She would find out soon. But if she looks back, she is lost. Again, even Daenerys realizes that her demeanor and the way she's going about things is going to make her be viewed in a really strange and bad light, and she herself is not even sure if she is of the right mind. Now, this could play into something if George wants to go this route later on in the series, where there's already been a moment where Daenerys is like, she doesn't even know if she's gone mad, but she's doing things because her dreams have told her to. You could play a lot of games with that if you're George going further in the series, but I wanted to point that out. Her bath was scalding hot, but it did not bother her at all. She let it heal her. She was then scrubbed to be made clean, and her hair was cleaned as well. All of this seems to almost be a test for Dany to see if she really can go into the flames and come back out. Yeah, it seems like Dany's just trying to get a little bit more just justification before she does this, right? Like this scalding hot bath that nobody else would probably get into, but for her, it makes her stronger. She's unaffected by it. It all kind of seems like just more of that testing of can Dany come out of these flames if she goes in. That gets us into page 802. She rose from the bath to be given perfume and dried, and her hair made straight and beautiful. But afterwards, she bid them to leave, as she wanted to prepare Drogo by herself. The last time that she will see Drogo's real body or be able to interact with him after this point, it's a last, moment of Daenerys looking back on the events of the book and of her husband, who she has come to love. She cleaned his body, running her fingers on it for the last time. She noticed his hair, and the first time she had touched it on her wedding night. She buried her face in his uncut hair, smelling of grass and dirt of her cow. She apologizes to Drogo for what she must do and for everything that has happened, as she thinks the cost was too great. Yeah, Dany's actions seem to have more or less spurned the death of her husband, the death of her child, the death of kind of everything around her. And, with the Drogo one, it's a little debatable in terms of when he became more of a vegetable and the things that happened. That was more Drogo's own fault. I don't blame Daenerys for that. Oh yeah, because Daenerys had Miri treating the wounds, well, that's what got Drogo killed. I don't think so. I think it was just an infection, Drogo not listening to instructions like I've talked about with that chapter, but the cost was pretty great. In terms of Daenerys bringing back her dragons, she pretty much had to lose everything to gain the dragons, which is definitely, I think, a fair trade. She's gaining something that's not been seen in the world for hundreds of years, and it's going to be basically why she's going to be able to take over the throne later on in the story. Dany braided his hair, put on his bells, dressed him in his favorite clothing, and then she herself got ready in similar attire. The sun was going down when she called for them to carry his body. They lay him on the cushions that faced the mother of mountains to the northeast. All the while she walked behind them. She commanded for the oil to be brought, and then began putting oil on everything. And Dany commanded for her eggs to be brought, something in her voice that made her handmaidens run. Again, even her handmaidens, the closest people to her, kind of seem to believe she's going mad, right? Like, why is she asking for these dragon eggs? No rational person would put these dragon eggs in this funeral pyre. As Jorah is going to note in the next page, they are worth a ton of money, right? There's not a lot of dragon eggs left in the world, whether they're stone or like Dany's, where they're going to be able to actually hatch. They are very rare, and so many people would want them. And that gets us into page 803. Jorah tries to get her to stop, saying that Drogo will not need them in the Nightlands. She could sell those eggs and be a wealthy woman the rest of her life. But Dany doesn't agree, right? That's not what Dany wants to be. She doesn't want to be this wealthy woman the rest of her life. She wants to uphold the Targaryen name, take what she believes is hers. She wants the throne. She wants to be a conqueror. Dany notes they were not given to her to sell and places the black egg close to Drogo's heart, the green beside his head, and the cream gold between his legs. She kissed him for the last time, tasting the oil. And by kissing, I mean Drogo. She kissed Drogo, not Jorah again. As she climbed off the pyre, Miri notes she is mad. And Dany has, I think, a very fascinating line, because, again, if we do get mad Dany in the book, there's a lot of foreshadowing in this line. She says, "Is it so far from madness to wisdom?" That's a very fascinating line, because in a lot of ways, in her mind, right, because of what's going on right now, it seems very wise what she's doing based upon the dreams, based off every indication that she's been given that this will work out, right? But think about how many Targaryens probably had the same idea. You think about Aegon V, he probably had the same idea that, oh yeah, it was all going to work out. He's probably having these dragon dreams. He was, thinking that, or maybe even feeling the life in the dragon eggs, but that still didn't go right for him, right? And it was detrimental to the house, to House Targaryen and his family. So again, it's weird because it's almost like correct, right? There is like that thing where madness and wisdom are very close to each other. But at this, she instructs Jorah to bind Miri to the pyre. Jorah does not want to do this plainly, but Dany instructs him. He swore to obey her and asked Ricardo to help him. The god's wife did not cry out as she was being staked to the pyre. Dany herself pours the oil over Miri and thanks her for the lessons she has taught her. And again, using Miri as a blood sacrifice, more or less. And Jorah and Ricardo definitely don't want to do this. They've already seen what one blood ritual can do. They don't want to see another one. Miri says she will not hear her scream, but Dany notes that she will. But it is not her scream she wants. She wants her life. She remembers what Miri said about life and death. And as Dany stepped away, she notices Miri's eyes seem to change. The facade seemed to be gone. This person that didn't seem to care about their life, was dead cold, now seems to have a chance of maybe a hint of fear, which I think is understandable. Miri is about to be burned at the stake. It's probably I don't know if it's the worst way to die, but it's definitely up there as one of the worst ways. So now all that was left was to wait for the first star of the light, the first star of the night. The Dothraki believed the rider and horse were burned together and would join the stars. The more fiercely the man burned in life, the brighter his star will shine in darkness. And that gets us into page 804. Drogo spied it first and seemed to be a red comet, or as Dany interpreted, a dragon's tail, a good omen, she believed. And again, I do think if you want to point to anything of what the actual definition of this red comet is, Dany's is probably the most true, given when it appears and what Dany's doing, and also the way that magic kind of comes back into the world because of Daenerys. I will say, though, it is interesting when you look at the next book. One of the big points of the next book that connects the plotlines so well is the red comet. Everybody having their own distinct way of believing what it means. Some believe it's for the Lannisters. Some believe it's for all the death going on in the wars and all this stuff. So just a number of people have very different interpretations of what it actually is about. Dany took the torch from Aggo and thrust it into the pyre. At once the fire started, logs being consumed and falling. The pyre as a whole was burning, and Miri the whole time chanting at first, but then it became a shuddering wail, thin and in agony. Then the flames began to take Drogo, burning his body. Daenerys held her breath. For a moment, she wanted to do exactly what Jorah said. Go right up to Drogo, take him one more time. But she didn't, watching as his body became one with the flame and smoke. Again, I think it's very understandable, right? You know, you're watching your loved one for the last time you're going to see them, in their body, with their actual physical form, and you want to go to them one more time, but it's too late. She could smell the odor of burning flesh. She could hear as Miri continued to scream. The fire was reaching its highest. A very interesting description by Daenerys. She puts it burst to the air on great red wings. Everyone backed away except her. She was the blood of the dragon, and fire was inside her. I want you guys to think about something. So Aerys, for instance, right? He's someone that really loved wildfire. He loved the way the fire moved and things. Does this not kind of sound like that exact idea, right? The way Daenerys is like fantasizing the fire, and she's going to even fantasize it even more when she gets into it. I just want to keep that in the back of your mind, right? I'm not saying that Dany is going to go mad, but I'm saying if George wants to do it, all the building blocks are kind of there, because she's had a similar situation that could have led to her becoming mad. She thinks she knew the truth of it sometime before her wedding, in terms of the idea of like the dragons being able to come back, and her maybe having this blood ritual allowing for her to be kind of like fireproof for this time, even though she's not fully fireproof, like in this moment anyway, like her hair still burns away and stuff like that, but yeah. But it was before her wedding. But she notes the different flames that had been used and how beautiful they had looked. Again, she's kind of referring to, during this like wedding feast, there was some people using like flames and stuff like that. That's kind of what she's referring to. She took a step closer, thinking this was a wedding of sorts, as she opens her arms to the pyre. Miri was now silent, probably dead. She had thought her a child, but children learn. Again, Daenerys just seems mad. If you're watching Daenerys, she's like almost like trying to hug the fire. It's a really interesting sight if you're somebody not named Daenerys. Another step and she could feel the heat on her feet. Her body begins to sweat, and Jorah calls to her, but he does not matter now, just the flames. But she notices the beautiful flames, showing her different animals. To me, I think this represents the war to come, because she's seeing all these sigils of like animals that are, you know, in the war. You know, you have wolves. I think she says lions in here, like foxes. All of these things are kind of sigils for houses fighting right now. Maybe that's what she's seeing, and she, as the fire, will be the one to conquer them all. That's kind of my interpretation of that anyway, but let me know what you guys think. But lastly, she sees a horse, which she believes to represent Drogo, her son and stars. But think about this, right? Now she's coming, you know, now she's fantasizing about the fire. She's seeing maybe what kind of Mel sees in the fire. Very interesting description of what Dany's going through. Her vest had begun to smolder, so she threw it off as her breasts began to heat as well. For an instant, she sees Drogo on his horse with a whip of fire hitting the pyre. And she heard a crack as the pyre seems to cave in on itself, as ash and cinders come on her, and the wood starts falling out of place. But the golden pale egg, which has now been cracked open at her feet. She began to hear women shriek and children cry out in wonder. Again, this has got to be a fascinating sight. You're seeing this woman who has declared herself to be like the Khal of the Khalasar. She walks into this fire and pyre. It looks like she's gonna die. By any rational human being, she should die. But there's these loud cracks that don't seem human. They don't seem normal. This is not no ordinary pyre. And it also begs the question, are other people here seeing things in the fire, or is it just Daenerys? Right? Like, how is this going? But also the pyre itself is much larger than any normal pyre should have been. And Dany thinks, once again, only life can pay for death. Then a second crack came. She heard all of the onlookers shouting in fear, and even Jorah shouting for her. She thinks that she is fine. She is Daenerys Stormborn, the blood of dragons, the bride of dragons, and mother of dragons. She is the fire. With a huge amount of smoke and fire that reached 30 feet into the sky. If you guys ever had a massive bonfire, that's pretty high. That's an insane fire. That is unnatural, and I think everybody here in the Khalasar understands that. It seemed to come around her as the pyre collapsed and she stepped into the firestorm, calling for her children as she hears the last crack. And I want to end out the chapter, end out this book, reading from the story as I usually do for a lot of these chapters to end them out. But let's finish up and talk about the birth of the dragons. The third crack was as loud and sharp as the breaking of the world. When the fire died at last and the ground became cool enough to walk upon, Sir Jorah Mormont found her amidst the ashes, surrounded by blackened logs and bits of glowing ember, and the burnt bones of man and woman and stallion. She was naked, covered with soot, her clothes turned to ash, her beautiful hair all crisped away. Yet she was unhurt. The cream and gold dragon was suckling at her left breast, the green and bronze at the right. Her arms cradled them close. The black and scarlet beast was draped across her shoulders, its long, sinuous neck coiled under her chin. When it saw Jorah, it raised its head and looked at him with eyes as red as coals. Wordless, the knight fell to his knees. The men of her khas came up behind him. Drogo was the first to lay his araka at her feet. "Blood of my blood," he murmured, pushing his face to the smoking earth. "Blood of my blood," she heard Aggo echo. "Blood of my blood," Rakaro shouted. And after them came her handmaidens, and then the others, all the Dothraki, men and women and children, and Dany had only to look at their eyes to know that they were hers now, today and tomorrow and forever. Hers they had never been Drogo's. As Daenerys Targaryen rose to her feet, her black hissed, pale smoke venting from its mouth and nostrils. The other two pulled away from her breasts and added their voices to the call. Translucent wings unfolding and stirring the air, and for the first time in hundreds of years, the night came alive with the music of dragons. And that is the end of book 1. I just want to say, just talking about some of this stuff, all that stuff is kind of self-explanatory. The dragons come alive, something no one has seen for hundreds of years, like she talks about in the book. It's this moment where it's very similar to if you want to think about Christianity, where Jesus came out of the cave that had a stone in front of it. It's kind of that idea. It's like, this is so unnatural. This shouldn't be happening. You are now being treated like this higher being because of it. And so that is kind of the parallel that I kind of look at with real life and Daenerys, where these people have witnessed a miracle, something that should not have happened, but did. And you may not fully understand it, but all you know as a person, as a Dothraki or Jorah, whoever you want to look at, Daenerys walked into something that everybody else in the world would have died on and came out unhurt and with 3 dragons. That is uncalled for. And so, Dany has her Khalasar. But that is the end of the story for Game of Thrones. I wanted to say a big thank you for the people that have watched this series, that are even watching now and got to the end of the episode and my entire reread. This is, to me, probably one of my biggest accomplishments in my life. I put a lot of work into this series, as I think you guys know. And I know it was not the most watched series on my channel, of course, but I enjoyed it. It was a thing personally for me that I started, I think, around a year and a half to 2 years ago. And it's been something where it's been a consistent part of my life. Every week going in, doing a deep analysis of these chapters. And it was a great time to kind of talk about this stuff with you guys. And this isn't the end. We'll do a Clash of Kings probably starting in August. I want to take at least a month or 2 off from this because it is a very taxing process, I guess, and it's only going to get more taxing because the next book of Clash of Kings is more pages than the first book, but yet has, I think, 12 or 13 less chapters. So that means all the chapters are kind of longer in length. I mean, the first chapter with Creston's 30 pages long. So yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed this series. And again, I really thank you guys for coming along with me on this ride as I've grown as a person from the first episode to this episode. And, this has been kind of a staple of the channel. So I hope you guys all enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys.